There we go. All right. Well, we may have a few others join us as the time starts off, but we'll get things started here. I'll do a quick introduction of who I am, a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. All right. So we're going to be talking about insight tracking and kind of how to measure the impact of UX research. Um, so I'll give a quick kind of overview of the process where insight tracking fits within your typical UX research practice. Um, we'll go over kind of note taking and how that kind of ties into it, as well as, the synthesis, consolidation, and then how that ultimately rolls up into insight tracking, the dashboard that you can use to kind of keep track of insights and have a high level overview. Um, I'm happy to answer questions throughout the discussion. I want it to be interactive. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to come off mute and speak up or put your thoughts in the chat. Yeah, so we'll get started. And again, we might pause for a few seconds every now and again to let more people in. But without further ado, let me switch screens here. And I'm going to be showing you guys kind of just an overview. So what is insight tracking, right? And what's the purpose of insight tracking? One of the problems that really kind of insight tracking comes from is user research teams have little transparency into how their insights are being used and the impact that they make on the user experience after their readouts to stakeholders. And so really the solution is insight tracking, the ability to track and review what teams are doing with the insights and address, how those are being implemented and measuring the impact that they're having on the user experience. And so, and again, I'll get into showing you guys this, but just kind of an overview, just so you guys kind of get a high level understanding. And so kind of where does it fall within the process? And again, this is super high level. Typically, you've got your kickoff and planning phase, go through data collection, you've got your analysis that you'll do, and then you'll do your report and share out. Insight tracking tends to fall at the very end. So after you've shared out your results, it's kind of the step where you follow up with teams to really track, okay, I've shared the results with you. Now, what's being done to kind of implement those things and address those insights? And you can kind of split it up into just a few different steps. Number one is documenting the insights, right? So you need to keep track of all the insights that you have from every study. And that might include, keeping track of the finding, the recommendations, the severity of the different insights, and tying those things up into different keywords so they're easy to find if someone's interested in finding, any insights related to certain topics. And then step two is following up with the team, right? So this is where you'll set up a meeting, whether it's right after your report or readout, or typically maybe like a week or so later after they've had some time to digest, to talk through each insight and each recommendation, to track the status of resolution, and to see, hey, is this something that we're going to pursue? Are we pursuing it right now? Or is it resolved and we have a solution already in place? And then also keeping track of the notes, right? So if we say something's being pursued, we can keep track of, well, this is what we were doing to pursue that issue or insight. I've found a lot of benefit with insight tracking over my career. In the past, I've had projects where, and maybe you guys can resonate with this, but research will share out valuable insights to a team, and for whatever reason, whether it's dev limitations or stakeholder pushback, they don't implement a recommendation that we make, right? And sometimes that comes back to bite the team in the butt, where a product is released out into the wild and we start getting all sorts of customer complaints and calls about, hey, these are issues. And then next thing you know, you've got an executive breathing down your neck saying, why didn't we address this? Did we even know that this was going to be an issue, right? It's the researchers team to identify these things beforehand. So with an insight tracker, it's really helpful to be able to go back and say, yes, we have found this from previous research. This is what we had planned to do about it. And if it was something that we weren't able to address, this is why, right? And so it can really get a lot of buy-in from stakeholders. It shows the impact and the value of research, and also shows that people need to take you seriously, right? If that ever does happen. Thankfully, I haven't been in too many situations where it's happened that dramatically, where it's a very critical issue. But you still get a lot of small little things that sometimes fall through the cracks, or teams just can't address it for whatever reason. And it's good to kind of be able to go back to those things. And also having an insight tracker just makes it a lot faster and convenient to find those things, right? I know starting off, if that ever happened, we would have to find the right report and the right study that we found that in, and it might take an hour to kind of dig that back up again, and then trying to find the notes on what the team even agreed to do about it is a whole nother journey. And so all of this kind of solves a lot of those issues and pain points that you guys may have run into in the past as well. So I know this is the second part to a kind of a series that I've started. The first one was tied to building a UX research repository. So if you didn't have the chance to participate in that first webinar, I did send a link prior to this event to go ahead and look at that. But if you didn't and you're still maybe unfamiliar, just let me know. I can kind of share a few additional details. But a part of the Insight Tracker, it is built out in Airtable, and it does link to the UX research repository that I had talked about in part one. And so I guess before I dive into that, any kind of questions or thoughts around insight tracking that you guys have that you wanted to kind of address or get more details on? Perfect. All right. Well, we'll move on then. So let me now, let's see if I can change the view. I think I have to stop sharing again. Be bouncing around here. All right. Oh, we got someone else joining. All right. So if everyone can see this on my screen, I think it should pull up any second. There we go. All right. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, let me just give a quick overview again of Airtable. This is where we'll kind of keep track of everything. So we've got our UX research repository. We've got basically different workspaces here. This one's called UX research, and it keeps track of your repository, maybe different bases and so forth that you create. So I want to actually kick us off with looking at how to take notes in Airtable, because you don't have to implement this strategy, but it is how I do things, and it is pretty seamless in terms of rolling up into the Insight tracker. And so I wanted to start with that. What I do is I actually create a separate base for note taking. So I'll click into here and show you what that looks like. So let's say you've got a moderated usability study, and you want to take notes during the study. Everyone does it differently, and there is no right or wrong way to do it, but this way I've started doing it makes things a lot easier and more efficient for me, and it might be beneficial for you as well. So what I do is I have a column here for taking your notes, and then I've got another column here for keeping track of the task for that note. So let's say maybe you split it up into different tasks or different pages or topics, whatever it may be. And then we also have, keeping track of who said it, right? The participant. And then some other categories here. So insight, device, if you want to keep track, if you're doing like a mobile and desktop within the same study. And then some other things like keywords, if you want to keep track of that, and the severity. But for during your study, let's say you're doing something and you've got your first participant and you're giving them tasks and you want to take notes. So as you're moderating the study, whether it's you or someone else too, can take notes and say, hey, the user said X, Y, and Z, right? Or the user did something. Let's say user did X, Y, Z. right? And you can say, oh, they did that when, on the cart page for an e-commerce platform. And so what's nice is that's all you have to keep track of during the moderated usability session. Just take the note, keep track of the topic, and you can build this out ahead of time. Sometimes there's like topics that people bring up that are new or unique that you didn't expect, that they would comment on. You can, let's say, user mentioned XYZ, and it's like, oh shoot, I didn't have a topic for that. You can easily just say extra, or you could give it a keyword if it's relevant to something like a product card, right? You notice quite a few people are starting to talk about product cards during your study, so you want to just keep track of that. You can easily add that by just typing it out and clicking enter. And it creates a new topic for you. What's nice is typically you've got a little bit of time in between each session. And so what you might do is afterwards, you'll go through and fill in the rest of the information. So let's say you took a bunch of notes here. Let's just duplicate this just to kind of populate a bunch of notes. All right, let's say you got a bunch here and you're like, oh, these were all said by participant number 1. It keeps track of the timestamp too, which is nice. So you can refer back to the recording and see exactly, when that was said by the participant. What I do is I highlight everything as an insight, and I'll get to that in a second and why that's important. And then you can keep track of, hey, participant 1 did all the desktop stuff, and then you just go through. And then let's say that's all you need right now. Don't worry about severity or keywords yet. And then you do this for every participant, right? So you have another XYZ, and you go through and you keep track of which topic or task it was. And then you've got, participant 2 said this, and let's say they're on mobile, right? So you go through and you take all these notes, and you've got this big catalog here of raw notes. This is something that it might look like, right? And again, this is for demo purposes, so it's not kind of all made up information, but this is just to give you guys a sense of what it would kind of look like. You'd have this huge, long kind of Excel document of notes. Now, what's helpful and why I use Airtable for this is that it makes consolidation and your synthesis a lot easier. And so what I do is after the study is done, I go through and I create a new grid view. And I already have it here, so I'll click on that. And basically what this is doing is it's added a filter where the insight is highlighted and it's grouped by task. So now it's easy. You can see all the different notes that you had documented on every topic. So you can basically go through your notes by topic, which makes it a little bit easier to see the similarities and comparison of what people said, right? So let's say you're going through and you're looking through the notes and you're like, oh, hey, 2 and 3, or let's say participant 3 and 4 both had a note about the quantity stepper, and they both said kind of similar things, right? Well, let's consolidate that. So let's say participant 4 said this, and you can combine the notes if you want. I sometimes do this. I'll just add like a quick note that number 3 said this, number 4 said that. I don't want to delete the note, but I don't need to see it in my synthesis or analysis, right? Because I just added it here, and I can add the participant number here, and then I just uncheck it and it disappears, right? Because I'm filtering by the insight. So what's nice is all of a sudden I'm viewing one less note, and I've already started to consolidate some of the notes into different themes, right? And so as you go through your notes, it's very easy to kind of keep things consolidated and just go through different chunks at a time. Especially if you have like a meeting that breaks up your time through analysis, it's easy to come back to it. Usually, I might do like a couple tasks and then come back and finish the rest of them later. But ultimately, what it will look like after you've consolidated everything, you'll get something like this, right? So you have, hey, here's all the notes that I had on cart. And now these aren't necessarily notes, they're insights, right? We had 4 people say something along the lines of, or not knowing how many items they had in their cart, for example. This all has to do with the topic or task. You can add some quantity or keywords in there like quantity stepper. And now is when you go through and you say, okay, if we have 4 people, they all ran into this issue, which let's say is pretty much, impedes their ability to complete a task, we can give it a severity rating. Is it a high severity, medium severity, low severity? Or sometimes people just say things that are like, hey, it would be nice if you guys had a different type of feature. And you can keep track of that as well with nice to have or user behavior. Sometimes people just do things that are interesting. You just want to keep note of that. Um, so you can kind of keep track of those different severities. Um, what I typically do for severity ratings is I measure by frequency and impact. So did it impact basically everyone in your study? If so, then it's probably a high severity rating. Or did it completely stop them from their task, or was it just a small hiccup? Right? If it was a small hiccup, maybe it's only a low severity. But if they can't complete a task, even if it's like one person, but they can't complete the task because of this issue, and it is a little subjective. So you might go with like a medium or a high in those sorts of situations. But regardless, this is how I move my notes into insights and keep it all kind of consolidated. And then I can easily keep track of the severity and, the devices that, maybe 3 and 4 were desktop and mobile. I can keep track of all those things. So this is kind of how I turn the notes into insights. Any question on this part? Because this is where we start to bridge between notes and our insight tracker. So just want to make sure this all makes sense for you guys before moving on. All right. And I'm going to share this template out from Airtable with you guys after the call, probably tomorrow morning, just so you guys can, you don't have to build it all out yourselves. I know in the first part, I walked through kind of how to build a UX research repository by hand. So hopefully you guys have some experience with how to use Airtable, but just to make things easier for you, I'll just send this as a template so you guys don't have to recreate anything and you guys can play around in it. So, oh yeah, we have a question. So is there a template to this workspace anywhere? Okay, perfect. Yes, I will send the template to you guys afterward. So, and also I'll send a link to the previous webinar so you guys can kind of get a better understanding of how to use Airtable and how to set this up for yourselves. Great. Any other questions? All right. If so, feel free to speak up, but I got my eye on the chat too. So, well, great. So this is kind of you've now moved from notes to insights, and you're going to take these insights, and really this helps with putting your report together, right? What I'll do is it's really easy to open up a PowerPoint document and just start kind of dragging and dropping your insights over, right? So you can make an insight around, hey, participants don't know XYZ. You drop that into your report. And then you typically, right, again, going back to that process, you'll do your share out and people will have questions and so forth. But then there's that follow-up of insight tracking. So how do we do that part? Well, what I do is I will copy, and whether it's from your insight board here, let's just copy a few here actually. Or you can just, post them or paste them over from your final report as well, which I sometimes do. But what we're going to do is actually move over to our full repository. And I'm going to move to mine that's kind of further built out. But again, quick overview. We've got different tables here. This first one is kind of our main repository that tracks all of our projects, objectives, who worked on it, the status of that project, keywords, when the project was done, the method, tools, basically track any details that you want of a study. What's nice is that the projects are tied to these insights, as you'll see here. For Contact Us, we've got a bunch of them in here already. And that is populated in another table. So if you click over into Insight Tracker table, you'll see a whole list of insights. And this is all the insights across all your different studies. And so it can be a little overwhelming to see at first, but so let's say you've got a new study that you've just completed, and I just copied them all over. So let me now paste those insights in here. Let's see if it loads. All right, I might have to delete some of this info here. Didn't mean for all of that to move over. Really what you're looking for is just copying the note or the insight itself. And then what you do is typically with every readout, right, you have recommendations for your insights. So let's say, participants wish they could leave a note to their shopper. The recommendation was, consider adding a note feature to the cart page or something. And so this one, right, maybe from the severity rating you had mentioned, this is more of a nice to have feature, not something critical, doesn't disrupt the user from completing their task, etc. You have all these notes from your readout, essentially, right? So you'll go through and you'll add all that information, and that's the documentation phase, right? So you've documented, and let's say we're doing this for the study, contact us. That's the page study, right? So we input all of our insights, we input all of our recommendations, we add all the different severity ratings that were tied to those. So that's our documentation process. And now what? What's the next step, right? We have to now follow up with the teams to see, what are you guys doing about these things, right? Like, how are these insights impacting the user experience? What are we going to do to address these more severe issues? And what might help too is when you set up that meeting, we can sort it by severity, right? So you can make sure you address the most severe issues first, and you'll go through and you'll say, all right, we just ran this study. You guys have had maybe some time or a couple days to kind of think through the results of the study. So let's go through each one individually. So you'll go through and you'll say, all right, here was the insight from the study. This is what we found. Here's the recommendation that we're making. You don't have to follow it, but this is what we would recommend. And this is a pretty severe issue. So what's the team going to do about it? And then you just have that conversation with your stakeholders. And typically, right, they might say, oh, so-and-so is going to be working on that. They're looking at implementing different design solutions. So you want to keep track of that, right? So what I do is I just have a text field here, and I'll say, hey, Daniel, or let me go with Cynthia. Cynthia is working on implementing this into the designs, something like that, right? Whatever you guys discussed during your meeting. And because the team is pursuing it, let's keep track of that as well, right? So we've got different resolution statuses. One is that hopefully doesn't happen too often, is called will not pursue. That means you have an insight, you've got your recommendation, and the team's not going to pursue it. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen, right? Whether it's something unique, and typically for like the nice to have features, if it's just like completely out of scope or unrealistic, you might say, oh, you're not pursuing it. Pursuing now is, of course, something that the team is looking into, and it's something that everyone has agreed you can pursue it. Sometimes we say, hey, we're going to pursue this later. It's not the appropriate time, or maybe we don't have, the bandwidth or the right back-end services to provide it. But we do want to address it, right? And in those cases, we're going to say, hey, we're pursuing it later, or that it's on hold. And then sometimes we come up with problems, and they're like, oh, we already anticipated that. We already have a solution in place. Or maybe they followed up and they resolved it. And so you can mark that as resolved. But for this one, I'll just say pursuing now. And then I also added this actually recently, but sometimes it's nice to just keep track of ownership, just to keep people responsible. So you can add an ownership, like a stakeholder, someone that's in charge of it, maybe a product owner or product manager. Or if like a specific designer is working on a solution, you can give it to them. So let's say, hey, we said Cynthia's working on it. Let's add her name to it, right? What's nice is if your whole team has access to Airtable, they can create their own views and say, hey, what are all the insights or all the projects that I'm assigned to that I need to get done? Then it starts to get a little bit more into project tracking and like product management. So, you feel free to add whatever details you want. I typically just try to keep it simple to what the UX team needs. But if you feel the need to add additional details, like who owns it, the timeline of when that work started and so forth, you can do so. It does automatically, I have it tracked to like when you insert the insight, it automatically tracks that date. So it is helpful too, because you can say, hey, we documented this insight 4 months ago and the team's still pursuing it, right? Maybe it's time to follow up and say, were they able to resolve that or not? And so you can kind of keep track, and there's actually a way you can create a formula too. So if it's like the ticket or the row is older than 5 or 6 months, you can have it notify you or something, which is pretty helpful. But overall, I typically try to just go through this with the team and the stakeholders maybe a week after the readout, give them some time to kind of digest it and think through a plan. And then document what they do. And then on a quarterly basis or whatever makes sense, follow up again and say, hey, we said we were going to address some of these things. Where are we at with it? Depending on your company, it could take weeks to resolve certain issues or even months. So for the teams that takes longer for these sorts of tools are more helpful, right? Because sometimes we can't address it right now, but we can, we're planning on addressing it, and then it's 6 months later and they're still working on it. So anyway, these are different ways in which you can kind of keep track of that. I think I've got a view of what it looks like. Here we go. So this is kind of what it would look like after your meeting with stakeholders. You'd have the insight, the recommendation, the severity, the resolution status, in the product description of like what was done. You might even have some keywords in there, and it's all tied to your project, right? And so what's nice is since it's tied to your project, you've got keywords, it's easy to find these insights as well. So going back to part one that we had talked about last time, we have this other table here called keywords. And so what's really great here is, let's say someone was interested in, hey, do we have any insights on quantity steppers, right? Because sometimes a project is so large, it touches on so many different little things. So you can say, hey, we've got maybe some projects that touch on progress tracker, order summary, but then you can take it a level deeper and say, cool, we've got specific insights that talk on certain topics. And so you can see, oh, quantity stepper, here's a specific insight tied to that. And we can say, oh, here's a high issue that we have on that topic. This was the issue, this was our recommendation, and whether or not it was something that was resolved. So that's really helpful for particularly like maybe leaders, UX leaders or product managers, to kind of get a quick glimpse of what's been done already in the past and previous issues. And ultimately, like I mentioned in the very beginning, this all rolls up into your project tracker or your repository, right? So we've got our contact us and checkout studies. They're both complete and they're full of all these different insights. And so you can click on this and see the full list of them. And you can even click into these if you want more detail. So it's really kind of a helpful tool for anyone that's looking for kind of more detail on different studies. What's also nice is if they want the full report, you just add the link there, click on that, and they can get the more kind of maybe more thorough report that goes into depth. And then let's see here. I think that kind of covers a lot there. Any additional questions? And yes, I do have your guys' email address, so I should be able to send all this for you guys. But all right. Well, we're making good time. We might not take up the full hour, which is always good for me. I like to be efficient. So, assuming you guys have no questions yet, let me move on to kind of our last part of the webinar, which is kind of my more favorite part. I don't know the positions that you guys hold, but particularly for management, this is a really cool feature, and it's something that Airtable just recently rolled out over this past 12 months, I believe. But I just started getting into it and started playing around and found another way to kind of take the Insight Tracker another step further. And it's called interfaces. So at the top, you've got your data here. There's also a lot of automations, which are really cool, but I won't get into that today. Um, but a lot of ways to kind of like send notifications about different things. And then you've got interfaces. And so interfaces are basically like dashboards that where you can kind of get a summary of data and numbers, charts, and graphs. And so I've created a custom one specifically for insight tracking. And so, and I can kind of go into detail if you guys are interested in how I put this together, but again, I'll send this template out to you. But what this is doing is it's showing, hey, what's the total amount of projects that we have in our repository? We've got 6. Okay. Well, what about all the insights that we've documented in our insight tracker? Well, we've got 10. For this demo, we've got 10. And then down here, you've got a chart that shows how many high severity issues that you've identified, how many low severity, medium severity, maybe nice to have insights that you've tracked across all of your studies. So you can kind of get the numbers on these things. And then you can also get a summary of how many insights overall do we have that are on hold, right? That the team is not able to pursue. And so you can say, oh, we've got 3 that are currently on hold. You can actually click into here and see those insights. Currently, I'm working through how to make it so you can click on it and actually see it and have it pop up. Haven't figured that out yet, but I'm sure there's a way. But right now, you just read which ones they are and you go and look for them. But you can also see, okay, how many insights are we currently pursuing and how many insights have been resolved? And this ultimately goes back into really showcasing, hey, this is all of the work that the UX research team has done. Here's all the insights that we've gathered. And this is what the team's doing with those insights, right? Like we've resolved this many different issues. The teams are pursuing this many different insights that we've already identified. And then most importantly, again, going back to kind of like covering your butt if they release something without implementing your recommendations, how many insights are on hold or not being pursued? And that's where we get into this column on the far right, which outlines different risks. And what this is doing is it's actually pulling all the insights that are on hold with a different severity rating. So major risks are things that the teams are not pursuing that are high severity, right? Those are major risks, right? That means the team's not pursuing it, but we know that it's going to cause problems. And so anything basically in these boxes here are very important. And so if you see any numbers in here, you're like, hey, why isn't the team addressing this, right? Like we need to address this. And especially for like management, it's really helpful to be able to see this easily across all the studies and then talk to the right people to say, what's being done about this? Why can't we do it? And if so, like what can be done? And again, this will go over kind of major risks, moderate risks, and low risks. And you can click on these boxes to see them. Well, cool. So that kind of covers the dashboard. And again, you guys can kind of customize it to best fit your needs. I'm still playing around and learning about dashboards a little bit more in Airtable. But this is something that I've played around with and really found a lot of great use out of. Another really cool use case for the dashboards is what I've done for this past year. So when the team kind of completed our year end, I was able to say, hey, this is how many projects we completed. This is how many people we've talked to from our studies. This was the number of insights that we've tracked, the different tools, different methodologies that we've used. And it was all automated and populate it into a dashboard because we track those things, right, in the repository. So it ultimately all rolls up. And what's nice is that it is automated. You don't have to go through and look back at all the different reports that you've created and count them up. It does that for you. So just another use case that is really helpful that I've used this for. Well, great. I know someone just joined, so I apologize, but you missed kind of most of it. That does bring us to kind of the end of our insight tracking conversation, but it is all being recorded. So if you did miss anything, feel free to go back and look at that. And I'll send that out tomorrow morning, assuming the video uploads. But that was a lot of information. Any new questions or outstanding concerns, anything that you guys had? And feel free to come off mute too if that's easier, or put it in the chat. Great, yeah. From Jordan, any tips for other insights to graph aside from severity? Um, I mean, severity, I think, is like the most useful. I'm trying to think of other things. Again, kind of going back to like whatever you keep track of in your repository or your insight tracker, you can ultimately create a graph for, right? And I can kind of show you guys how it's created as well. But let's see here. We've got different elements you can add. So again, if you want to provide more context, you can add like different text, dividers, grids. You can also create a calendar view, which is helpful if you're interested in kind of showcasing, different timelines of when projects took or how long things have been in pursuit of different insights, Kanban views, gallery views. But I mostly just use the charts and numbers. They also have buttons, which is interesting. So maybe this is a dashboard you share out with other stakeholders, or and let's say maybe they're like, hey, I have a question, and I want to contact you, or maybe submit a new request. You can add a button and direct them maybe to like a contact page or a research request form or something like that. That might be cool. But really, yeah, it does ultimately go back to whatever data you're tracking in your repository. You can create a dashboard and summarize that, right? So we've got everything we've got projects, which basically populates everything else. So don't feel like every table you have to enter new data, and it automatically kind of updates all this as you go. But if you've got blockers, let's say you're tracking different blockers, you can keep track of like how long it's taking, how long the different issues are taking to resolve, how long it's delayed your projects. You can do things like that. And then again, yeah, just these things. I mean, you could track, I guess we'd already talked about it, but resolution status and severity. I mean, that's really all that comes to mind. But if there is like things that come up and you guys are interested, and like, oh, hey, I wish I knew how to do this or that, and you want to reach out to me, feel free to do so, and I can try and assist. I'm sure there's people at Airtable that are more qualified than me, but I have used the tool pretty extensively, so I'd be happy to help. And then, okay, yeah, so maybe a better question would be what's most commonly graphed, severity being most important. Makes sense. Okay, yeah. So again, yeah, severity, resolution status, what things are actually being addressed and what things aren't. Well, cool. Any other questions? Good stuff. All right. Well, again, I'll wrap that up there. And if you guys do have any other questions, you can reach out to me. I'm just going to put in my Gmail. It's a small group, so I don't mind if you guys reach out to me personally. I'm always happy to help. I also do consulting after hours for my main job. So if you guys want to get additional help, happy to do so. I can send those links and everything. Yep, yeah, I don't mind LinkedIn connection requests. Happy to connect with you guys. And again, when I share out the recording of this video, I'll also add all the additional resources. So like the template, the recording from the first webinar as well, so you guys can better understand Airtable and the repository part. And also a link to connect with me and schedule some time if you guys are interested. So, well, great. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure. I'm always happy to kind of share these things, and it is something new that I've started to do, is just share out more of my work. So I hope to continue to keep them going. And I like operations, so a lot of things around repositories and insight tracking, but do have a lot of experience in different methodologies, like service blueprinting is a big one that I'd love to share more info on if you guys are interested in that. I do have your emails, so if you guys don't mind, if I do come up with another webinar in the future, I may ping you guys. I won't hopefully be a nuisance at all, but if I do come up with a future webinar or any additional things, I will reach out. So love a service blueprint session. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about that one. It's a lot of work, but it is a really useful tool. So I'll look into that one next then. Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much, and have a great rest of your evening.